Highsec buyback offers 90% JITA anywhere in Highsec. Simply go to highsec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Talking in Stations. I'm your host, Rahne, and I'm joined by Artemis doing engineering work in the background. She will not be talking much today, but I will still see if she has questions. We are joined by Rocket X to talk through the Rekking crew news that has happened over the last month. Rocket, would you give a brief info of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. So, Rekking Crew, the group I'm part of and have led for a very long time, started out as a kind of low-sec hunting entity based in Derelict and Domain, which neighbours Providence. Over a period of time, probably about 2 years or so, we stepped up our aggression more and more, and eventually block, so CBA and friends collapsed, left the area, and then left the region empty. At that point, the coalition as a group took the region, and I've been kind of playing space manager for the last couple of years. Very recently, though, that's now changed.
So who's taken over in your place then?
Well, it's not a case of like me stepping out of it completely. It's more that the old guard Wrecking Crew groups, so Few, Arton, and HTP, which were the original founding groups in RC, we had a kind of a lot of extra people that were around and took Provi with us. Those alliances really haven't been able to contribute in any meaningful way to the kind of like greater health of the coalition, not putting members in fleets, not contributing FCs to the front line. And it's just come to a point now where the kind of senior members took a very, very long time and a large amount of effort to provide management decisions and kind of reinforce them strategically, right down from kind of member management to looking at self-timers, making sure their ADMs were up, which is not kind of a level that kind of coalition leadership wanted to get involved in with any particular alliance. We were in this situation, we've been in this situation for a while. The alliances have been in that state for a variety of reasons. Pretty much their original leaders that were around when we originally took Providence have left the game. One chap had an accident at work and passed away. His alliance was taken over by a caretaker leader that did a decent job, but we could never really fill his shoes, was a very good kind of bureaucratic leader, but wasn't really a kind of the inspirational figurehead / content creator of his predecessor. Many other alliances have kind of undergone leadership changes, and a number of them have just ended up with caretaker leadership, basically, and just kept it ticking over. So it kind of got into that position. So we reached the point where the kind of senior executive level of RC didn't any longer want to babysit them, for want of a better way of putting it. So we've got to the point now where it's like, okay, we'll reset them. They can do what they want, and then Wrecking Crew is back to the original 3 founding alliances. So it's less of a case of us stepping away and more of a case of the original alliances getting back together and going back to our roots, so to speak.
So are you guys moved away from Provi then and are back originally now in low-sec?
Well, I mean, we still hold some sovereignty in Providence anyway, and we don't really see that going anywhere. It's not really our mainstay, though. Realistically, Few and HDP and Arton as well have been based from low-sec, realistically, for a very long time anyway. Like, Few has been living in the area since about 2012, so 11 years now. Arton, even longer, has been based in Domain. So we're not really going anywhere. No one's moved anywhere. We did have a couple of random alliances, Woodacres, thinking that we would be evacuating to Highsec for some reason, despite the fact that, like, having lived in low-sec for the last 10 years, none of us can actually go to Highsec. So we were a little confused as to what the kind of master plan was there. But, you know, some aren't the sharpest tools in the toolbox, so to speak.
Alrighty. I remember your original message, I think Artemis was showing it, around how you would, so RC starting out as sort of like this hunting group, but you would not be hunting some of these former RC alliances.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, we've not said that we won't hunt them because they know it's what we do. By being reset, they'll become targets for us and vice versa. We originally found content out of Proviblock, but we're not really going to continue that in the same way as such. The general plan is just to reset them and then let them exist. So it's not like we're going to roll in and take their salve or kick over their forts. I mean, we'd be capable of it if we wanted to, but we don't have any kind of interest in that kind of combat at the moment. It's something we've been doing, I won't say against our will, but it wasn't something that it's something that we got into when we took Provi that wasn't really something that we enjoyed. So it's something that we've been putting up with for the last 2 years, pretty much, whilst various other bits and pieces have happened within the coalition and around us. So it's kind of more back to doing the kind of hunting thing. It's not really to say that, that we won't come into conflict with some of these alliances down the road. There's been no obligation in that regard, but it's very much kind of just View and HGP walking away from its responsibilities of defending the rest of the coalition. We will of course shoot them and treat them as any other neutral, but it just means that we're not going to go kicking them out, and they're free now to either form a coalition of their own, pursue diplomatic ties with, Imperium, Fire, although Fire is probably not too likely right now given the news over the last 24 hours, or even form their own little coalition and go at it themselves. Generally, that's pretty much the latter's pretty much what's taken place. A couple of those alliances have picked up a fair number of systems that were dropped by others exiting the region, and pretty much got one alliance broadly controlling the north and one controlling the south, and they've got decent diplomatic relations. I don't really think anyone there's looking to immediately start shooting each other, but, time will tell.
So I'm curious, because I know you mentioned the Rekking crew really didn't care for Sov or owning Sov, so why? What was the purpose then? I guess this goes way back then with fighting Provi and taking over Provi's space, like Provi block space.
Well, we didn't really take it over, to be honest. What we basically did was and I think it was the April of 2020, we offered a non-invasion pact, basically saying that we wouldn't go for fortizars or larger. We wouldn't get jump gates, we wouldn't cloaky camp them, we wouldn't attack their Sov. And they declined it, basically told us to go screw ourselves. Meanwhile, they were cloaky camping a couple of our guys in the small number of systems that we did hold, and they just stepped it up. So we basically got to a point where it was, okay, well, you want to play that game, let me show you how you actually play that game. And we stepped up the aggression from RC and started attacking critical systems, mainly the ones that neighboured LowSec. And the main purpose of that wasn't really to take the region. Obviously, you've got the the domain research and mining guys that are based in domain. A few is based in Derelict. So the purpose really was to take the neighbouring systems to LowSec and put jump bridges in, which allowed us to form centrally a lot quicker into our main staging in nullsec, which was YMP. And it just basically means that we could take gates to nullsec and then one jump and we're in that main staging. And it just meant we could get there without jump fatigue and respond a lot quicker, either to counter hunting threats or to get there for timers that we created, that sort of thing. So there was never any intention to kind of take the region. That kind of snowballed, and we pulled off a few escalations on them and did a hell of a lot of damage to them. At that point, there was still a lot of people in CVA that thought that RC was on the verge of collapse would collapse within 2 or 3 weeks. And then we kind of get to the end of June, July time, and we dropped a Keepstar in YMP. And it was just after kind of the Vietnam War, World War B2, whatever you want to name it, had taken off. And RC had said that, we would support Pappy and sent our Titans to delve basically after we'd got something else to do. So what we did was we got the blue standings, and at the time, CVA, their backbone was Test and Legacy Coalition, which was obviously now blue to RC, and therefore when we dropped the Keepstar in Provi, there wasn't anything they could do. And at the time, Provi thought we probably had, 15, 20 capitals, supers, or what have you. And we put over 60 super caps on the fort to online that Keepstar. And it was at that point where no one in CVA or Provi Block anymore could deny that realistically they still existed in the region with our permission. We militarily had control and we could have taken the region if we wanted to. But it was that point that no one in Provi Block could deny that they weren't in charge anymore, regardless of who owned the space. There was a lot of infighting, a lot of drama, and eventually the CBA guys made the decision to pull out of Provi entirely. They essentially abandoned the region after having accepted a nip from us, which basically meant that we ended up not burning any of their stuff before the region, before they evacuated. I mean, we were still hunting them, but we weren't attacking structures, making times, anything like that. We weren't cloaking camping anymore. So they could have realistically continued to exist there, but they would have known that they weren't in control, like I say. They made the decision to evac, and then probably 6 weeks later, the space was just sitting there, still in CBA's hands, empty. So I think like one Thursday night, we went and created solve timers across 52 different systems in Provi, both TCUs and iHubs, and then wiped them all when those timers came out and took the entire region in a single day. And then it was just divided up between whichever RC Alliance wanted solve. And I mean, like I mentioned earlier, a few HCP Arton didn't really particularly care for solve, but we had a lot of other smaller alliances that kind of joined us where, you know, they come in with the traditional end game that nullsec is where you want to be, and it's it's their end goal and they want to set up there. So we, as a command team, the content directional people in RC weren't particularly bothered about it. The actual leadership of each member alliance was very keen on moving into Provi, and we took the popular opinion, said, okay, yeah, go for it. We originally intended to leave a few systems open, but then there was always the risk that, someone could come in and drop a iHub and TCU, make it a capital in a time zone that was completely uncontestable for us, which would give us defensive problems. So we ended up just filling the gaps in the whole region and, fortifying it pretty much. So we ended up with solve that we didn't really plan on having or controlling. And then that, when Dread Bomb was a thing and they decided to go and poke the empty Legacy space while Legacy was in Delve, ended up controlling a lot of catch as well. I mean, it did extend to Immensia and Tenerife during that war as kind of fire scooped up the Legacy refugees that came back from the deployment into T5Z. Fire scooped up a hell of a lot of ex-Legacy alliances and used them to fill that space. At the time, Sedo wanted to go for a war against Fire, and they're kind of 5 times our size, so it was never going to end particularly well. We knew we wouldn't be able to hold Immensia or Tenerife anyway, so the plan would have just been to concede that, fall back to catch. But due to kind of certain people going inactive during the course of that campaign, it literally fell very quickly and ended up being a case of we just hold the line and catch, and we did that kind of from then, and then Dread Bomb collapsed and we continued to hold the line and catch, and Fire was never able to make any process beyond it. And that wasn't really kind of a lack of effort on their part, it was more a just simply geographically, catch is not viable to assault when you're staged in Deterrid, right? It's not practical. It's just too far to do, no capital superiority.
All right.
Yeah, like I say, it ended up building kind of a fortress in Provi, and then kind of an extension to that in catch in the long term.
Yeah, so you kind of walked through the taking of Provi. You mentioned, so I know at the start of this you mentioned the original Rekking Crew alliances are going back to their roots, but you picked up a lot of alliances on the way. Was that them seeking you out, or you seeking them out? Like, how did Rekking Crew really grow from more than just a ragtag bunch of friends hunting supers?
A number of the initial alliances were people that were either in Provi or were ex-Provi members that really weren't happy with the way they'd been treated, or they and others simply just came because it was kind of flavour of the month. We were getting good content, getting decent fights, and it was a case of, I want to be involved in that content, so they came and joined us and flew with us. I mean, we had all sorts of people at the time. You'd see kind of Shadow Cartel show up every now and again. Siege Greed was flying with us on and off. Waffles was also in the area at the time and kind of doing a lot of the spearheading on the FC front. Templars Council have joined us. probably 6 months before the Provi invasion happened, and started getting involved in content. And the last Spartan, as you're probably familiar with, as an AT captain, an AT pilot, did a lot of FCing for us and kind of has done ever since. But it just really snowballed because of the content that was happening. It was somewhere that people wanted to be involved. And those that didn't come from that direction literally came from Provi itself. I mean, at one point, there was an alliance in Provi, and we got one of our faction warfare corps into the alliance. So it looked like a genuine faction warfare corps. Obviously, as soon as we got the corps into Provi block, we kicked everyone that wasn't us and then just filled it with our spies. So there was like a whole corporation in Provi block that was just us, which was kind of absurd because, they convo the CEO and be like, oh, this guy looks like a spy, you need to kick him. And the CEO would be like, okay, I'll kick him. And then he gets kicked, and then you just put another character in, and the cycle continues.
All right, I gotcha. Sorry, my cat's been distracting me. She wants attention. So you have all these groups that join. When the decision was made to leave, were any of them like, no, we want to stay, like we want to move back to Lowsec with you guys, or was everyone kind of on board with it?
Generally, the reaction was pretty positive, because the amount of kind of work and time it takes to lead a defensive campaign like the ones we've endured against both Fire and sometimes Horde got involved and helped them as well. We fought off Snuff a few times. NSH attacked us as well, more recently Deepwater Hooligans. To go through all of those and it all come down to you is very stressful and very time consuming. And it just kind of makes you see that if these alliances are in those situations now, then there's no point giving it another 6 months, because they've had 2 years to not be in that shape of relative peacetime. And they're still the same way. So it really kind of, the alliance leaderships took it very, very well, to be honest, and they all understood the decision. They were surprised that I hadn't kind of thrown my arms up in there and said, what the hell, and done it earlier. But I don't think from certainly any of the leadership members I've spoken to and some of the line members that I've managed to reach, generally it's been pretty positive. A couple of the alliances have merged particular corps into a few HTP and Arton and selected members. But as I mentioned, as I said in the original ping, if they were people that had just kind of sat there and twiddled their thumbs while the coalition was defending its assets, then it wasn't someone that we would entertain joining us. But yeah, like I say, it was taken pretty well, to be honest. No one's held it against me. Generally, a lot of people are seeing it as a fresh start for their alliances and kind of a reset button, and time to do or die and stand on their own. But we'll see how they go moving forward. But generally, few is just looking forward to not having the weight of carrying the coalition on its shoulders from a leadership perspective, because it has impacted my own alliance as well, with both myself and my directors taking so much time to do RC things and jumping through hoops and bending over backwards to help.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know Eve has a second job is always kind of a meme, but has some basis in reality with the work alliance leaders at least put in. Do you want to talk a bit about, I know you mentioned going from Provi, and we talked a bit about the offensive taking Provi. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the defensive wars you've been fighting? I've heard a lot of stuff from Deepwater Hooligans, but I don't really know how much of that is spin versus smack talk and whatnot. And as well as like Snuff, I didn't really realize you guys were defending against Snuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll stick with the most recent defensive campaign, because I think Snuff has attacked us 2 or 3 times. NSH did the same thing, and some with varying success. NSH completely just fell on its face the moment they got down anywhere near us. I think they were 2 mids out before they collapsed and went home to kind of get back under Frat's skirt. But the Deepwater campaign started with them reinforcing structures in the faction warfare area. And that was in Lamar, so a couple of jumps out of Amamaki. We have a keep star in Lamar, and there was a Casa fort anchored just off it that was just kind of a staging fort just in case it ever got RF'd, that the keep ever got RF'd. They shot it a few times, and the first couple of times we, maximum carriers, we sent like 100 carriers up there, and they just looked at it and was like, no, and stood down. in the kind of later the next couple of weeks, it was a case of, well, there's no point literally going all out on and max forming for every armor timer because they're just going to reinforce it over and over again on blue ball. So we stopped defending the armor timers and started defending hull timers. In the interim, there was a couple of times where they started to drop Astras and that lot off our keep. So when they coincided with like an armor timer or a hull timer on the fort, then we go and shoot them as well. But otherwise, we largely let them go uncontested. The first real fight we had in that conflict was in Lamar. We kind of had the discussion in our director chat. First, it was like, okay, it's a fort, it's not being refit, full combat effectiveness. Don't bleed more than the fort is worth trying to save it. So it was a case of drop a couple of facts, take fooms, and expect them to bring Tempest fleet issues. Now, generally, their counter to anything missile-based is to firewall, which is pretty sensible, and it's very, very effective. So the plan essentially was to bait them into the Fort Izar's dock range, not just tether range at 0 meters, but within 10k, because you tether 10k off a structure. Bait them within 0 so that you couldn't activate smart bombs, so it would prevent the firewall from being effective at all. So I kind of said, you know, guys, have you got this, or do I need to alarm clock for the 3rd time this week at 2 a.m? And they said, no, we've got it. We know what we're going to do. And then I woke up in the morning to like 300 bill in dread losses. And it turns out that the guy FCing it had decided that, screw it, we just want the fight. And that kind of, for me, it wasn't the fact that we lost the fight that frustrated me. It was just very much the fact that it put blood in the water. We knew that that was the kind of fight that D-Water would be looking for, and a number of their allies would too. So, I said, okay, great, you may have wanted the fight. The guys may have enjoyed it, even losing 3-1 in the escort, despite having roughly even numbers. But strategically, it's a gigantic mistake. And the other thing that it did as well was we knew that we had roughly even numbers of dreads with theirs, but when it comes to kind of dread for dread, it doesn't really match up, because you have an alliance like Deepwater that individually they've got, I won't say they're very competent. Some of their players are kind of, as with every other alliance, decidedly average, but the kind of core network of guys there know what they're doing. And the entire alliance has like at least mid-grade amulet sets and things like that. So when you're looking at kind of a nullsec-based, largely nullsec-based coalition that mostly doesn't have amulets, and you're putting those dreads against the same number of amuleted dreads, it just doesn't stack up. You're going to die faster. You have your DPS on field for lesser amount of time. So getting into a dread fight was never something that we were interested in and should have avoided at all costs. And that was the kind of agreement from the get-go. And that happened a couple of more times before I just turned around and said, okay, no more. Under any circumstance, it doesn't happen. But that was kind of very early on. And when it became clear that we wouldn't be able to, we could contest them and win at max form, that wouldn't be an issue. But you don't want to be max forming every night, every time they create a timer. So we decided that we'd kind of stagger ourselves, let some of the structures go uncontested, largely only contest hull timers, if anything, and go and, bleed some structures, let some die. Anything small, Athenors, Astras, we didn't defend. Some of the forts that weren't properly fit, we didn't defend them either. The rest of them we refitted, unanchored anything that was unnecessary, kind of low-hanging fruit in low sec, because this was all in low sec at this point, and then swapped all our timers to EU. And we knew that would carry the risk of Snuff deploying against us, because the issue is that Snuff will not alarm clock to USTZ, or, sensibly, they don't want to have to alarm clock every night to then have a difficult fight with a ridiculous amount of numbers, which isn't necessarily in their interest. So we retimed it to EU knowing that Snuff deploying was a possibility, and then deliberately made things as annoying as possible for them by doing things like, when we fought them, we'd have a pos that was sitting on grid, and we would warp supers over to it, leave the fighters on the fort, and then sit the supers on the pos force field, and then just Skynet their facts and stuff to death. We started loading stand-up shadows into our Fortizars and volleying their long-range dreads, things like that, and just made it really annoying to fight. And any time it looked like I mean, they formed with whatever Snuff had, and they're not in a great position at the moment because of the whole kind of Russia-Ukraine thing affecting their numbers and a lot of their members' kind of personal lives. So they don't have a tremendous amount of numbers at the moment, but they had the Lightning Squad, which have been flying with them fairly consistently, and whatever Boltrum's group is called, Hidden Leaf Ninja, something or other.
Yeah.
So they were forming probably 150 dudes, 200 dudes against us combined. We were forming about the same on our own. But again, it just, they kind of outship us and outbling us in kind of our line member doctrine. So it wasn't really viable to fight them very often. We fought them, I think, twice. Came out relatively isk-even on both battle reports. And by that time, we pretty much anchored all of our structures, and Snuff sat there twiddling its thumbs. They did manage to get kind of 2 high-value kills. So one was a refining Datara that was in Faspera, a couple of jobs south of Kamal. And another was the Satoyo that was on the same grid with it. So the Satoyo timer was interesting because fire showed up as well, much to the disgust of pretty much everyone else involved. The kind of look was that it had been orchestrated between fire and deep water, but that really wasn't the case. They just knew about the timer and showed up and pretty much blue-balled the rest of the fight and prevented people staying on grid. But amusingly, we had, it's Kamal spelled with a C, by the way. I'm just looking at the stream.
Yeah, I typed it too.
Like camel, but with 2 A's. But the Satoyo timer was kind of funny because, they were saying, oh, we're going to get this 10 bill core through you guys. But we'd had a Rorqual cloaked off that Satoyo for like 4 hours. And then as soon as it popped, we decloaked the Rorq, scooped the core and jumped out. And we also did that to the CB4 Sigma as well. One of the few guys, again, had his Rorq cloaked on grid, decloaked, scooped the 30 bill core and left. So it was just kind of like, be as annoying as you possibly can, which was worked fairly efficiently. And Snuff eventually left because Deepwater did not want to put their supers on the same grid as Snuff, which is understandable, and obviously meant that they couldn't really shoot anything that we hadn't already unanchored without taking significant losses in the process. So there was a general kind of frustration there, and also kind of a lack of where do we go next. So Snuff went home. At the same time, it kind of, the timing on the Satoyo had some consequences for us internally. So on the 25th of November, we sold one of the forts that borders Imensia to Sigma. And the idea that we had basically was to keep anything that was kind of Provi and Northern Catch, effectively have that timed to EU, because we knew that Snuff wasn't really interested in going to Nullsec anyway. It wasn't their forte. Deepwater was. But we also couldn't time anything EU that was close to fire, because they would form 2 full fleets against us, and we could form maybe 150 guys. So the decision was made to keep it a US time zone for the far southern stuff. So when that fort flipped over, it was due to flip over on the 29th EU time zone, but the intent was to cancel it and just keep it US so that fire wouldn't bother hitting it. And Deepwater couldn't hit it anywhere from where they were staged, so it wasn't really the threat. But they forgot to retime it, so it did flip on the 29th, and the armor timer for the. So what we had was, we were busy defending the Satoyo against fire, Satoyo against Snuff and friends, and then at the same time, fire went and reinforced the fort in QTAC S, which was unfortunate because the Sigma leadership guys effectively panicked and assumed that fire and Deepwater were working together to go and pinch the Sigma into catch and trap them and knock out their assets and that sort of thing. But realistically, that wasn't the case. There was no coordination between Deepwater and fire in that capacity. So they very much kind of put two and two together, made 5, jammed on their tinfoil hats and went running to Imperium, which left us in an interesting position. Obviously, we changed our timers to EU. only US presence really in bulk was Sigma anyway, whereas that EU was largely intact. So we kept our EU timers, stripped all of the stuff that we didn't want, that we didn't need to have in space. I think we scooped probably in the course of 2 weeks, we scooped, I think it was like 26 forts, 15 or so Astras and like 19 Athenors. So you're looking at 400 or 500 bill plus in unnecessary structures that we scooped on that, just to kind of mean that, okay, well, you've shot everything that you're going to shoot. Anything that you can shoot now is in a time zone that sucks for you, and you form like 5 guys. And anything that was going to take longer to time has now been unanchored. So there was really no road left to tread for deep water in their deployment. So they moved back to kind of Camella area over the new year, over the holidays, and they're probably planning to go somewhere else where they can find USTZ content moving forward. And then Sigma rolled all the way over to Paragon Sol and are now living there. So RC kind of was a lot smaller after this conflict than it was before. I think Sigma probably would have put about 40% of people in our fleets, like historically. But when you look at the kind of forms that we were doing, probably from mid-November onwards, Sigma wasn't really present anyway. So the wheels were turning in the background, generally going in that direction. I don't think that the kind of jump ship at the time and the stated reasons that were given were really justified, and there was probably an element of panic there as well, but also kind of long-term planning. It'd been on their kind of books for a fair while to do so. But interestingly, that kind of relationship between Sigma and Imperium caused us problems, because obviously a few and kind of the original RC groups have always been PanFam aligned. So we had a large proportion of the old guard dudes PanFam aligned and the Sigma guys Imperium aligned. So we couldn't really call Imperium because they said, the old guard guys are with PanFam, and then we couldn't call PanFam because they said, no, Sigma's friendly within it and whoever else. So it kind of left us in a place where like we needed the support, and there was no real place that we could source help from other than smaller alliances, which we did. I mean, we built like 400 or 500 battleships of each type that we needed for doctrines, and just literally were able to hand them out. So great, you've got 90 dudes, send to us, dock in a shuttle, here's a free Typhoon. If it blows up, that sucks, whatever. If it doesn't blow up, give it us back. And we just ran things like that with caches for a fair while.
I will say, after participating in a lot of these large wars, it's actually refreshing to see some of these smaller groups just work with other smaller groups. I'd say Fire is probably an exception there, but it's nice seeing all these small groups that, I really haven't heard of a lot of these alliances and whatnot working together to fight and have fun, or what looks like having fun. Looks like a lot of fun fights, at least.
We had NC sent the contingent down a fair few times. Shadow Cartel, Scary Wormhole People, No Forks Given, pretty much anyone that Deepwater had annoyed in the prior 6 months and then coming our way.
That's pretty nice, though. Make a lot of enemies and then they all turn up against you.
I mean, yeah, it's happened before. I mean, low-sec Voltron and whatever has formed to shoot Snuff when Snuff goes and bashes people. It's just one of those, really. And we kind of always have, even though we got fairly big at one point, we kept ourselves to ourselves and didn't really get involved in the kind of, because we could have gone and trampled all over low-sec if we wanted to, but we didn't think that was a good idea for the content in the area. So we just kind of had a mutual agreement to leave them to it and then go and kind of defend them if Snuff hit them, which we did on a number of occasions, to be fair. We probably will do in the future, but we'll see how things go.
So what does the future of Wrecking Crew look like then? You guys move back to low sec, kind of have still some space in Provi that you really don't want. What are the next steps, or what do you see as the future?
Well, for us initially it's R&R because of the and kind of restructuring, rebuilding. We're already in the process of kind of modifying our auth and moving back from Mumble to TS because we don't any longer need more than kind of 400 or 500 slots. simple things like that. But generally, it's kind of back to the super hunting, like pretty much permanent blopsing that we've always done, like wormhole diving and going whaling, things like that. The other thing is that because we don't have this kind of swathe of space responsible for defending anymore, there's a lot less need for us to be tied down and have kind of diplomatic relations with larger neighbours. Because, like, okay, if you want to go to Provi and you want to take 4 systems that we happen to still hold and we don't really care about, then go for it, right? But it just means that we've got a lot less to lose now, and in a lot of kind of the Provi and in our own alliance, to be fair, there was a hell of a lot of structures that were entirely unnecessary, like didn't need to be there, but had just been either given to us or had been placed there for one reason or another over the years, and had just never got pulled down. So we pulled all that down. We don't have such a big target profile now, so it means we can be a lot more aggressive in the plays that we make. But historically, we used to kind of jump around and do bait ops and, everyone throw their crap in their carriers and take a few mids and go and run somewhere else for a few weeks, and we can certainly do that now. So the freedom to do that and not be kind of always looking over our shoulder about what's going on in Provi is refreshing.
That's good. That's good to hear. Speaking of Provi, do you know what the current status is in Provi? Somebody in chat pointed out apparently CVA took a system. Are they coming back?
Yeah, CVA took a system, but from what I understand, it's a TCU, which is pretty much entirely as irrelevant as if they'd never done it in the first place. So I wouldn't consider that like a thing. Like, realistically, CVA is like 3 dudes which have been like being dragged around by Triumvirate for the last God knows how long. So realistically, I don't think that there's any possibility that that's going to be a thing. I mean, fine, if they want to move in, sure, I don't care. More people to shoot. But I mean, Self Alliance is one of the groups that kind of has come in and taken an IHOP, and you've got a structure in one of the systems that we're going to be selling to them, that sort of thing. But again, it's just one of those agreements with them where, they had the existing RC alliances that were in there. We said that we weren't going to go and invade them. The same kind of applies to them. There's an alliance called Wild Geese, something or other. They took a couple of systems, I think, in the old Coalition Hispania pocket. And, well, I mean, we weren't exactly sure who they are, but they're most of them are ex-Gunwaffe, and they had a fight, I think, in that pocket a couple of days ago of the south there, and ADS fought them, which is Deep Space Alliance, primarily Chinese time zone. And they fought these Wild Geese guys, and they did like 25 billion damage, and I think they lost like 1 Nightmare or something like that, and a couple of command ships. So those Wild Geese guys, I don't really think that they're going to be there very long, just because of the fact that the alliances that are in the area, whilst they aren't like super heavy, they realistically don't have the staying power to do anything against them.
Yeah, I remember them from back when I played Eve Echoes, but I don't know if that's the same group. But if it is, I'm really excited. If it is the same group, I'm really excited because I feel like they'll eventually get there, like to being a good group, a good group to fly with and fight with. But I don't know if it's the same group. I don't think it is.
Well, I think what we have to keep in mind is that the XRC alliances are all kind of very familiar with each other, and if anyone else comes in that's causing them problems, they probably will band together and go for it, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, there's the whole thing about, RC is like fractured and weak. None of those alliance. We're not kind of capable of contending with fire or someone like that. But like, if you show up with like a 20-man gang, then you're going to get your ship pushed in. So it's not really kind of they're so weak they're falling over, they're collapsing. The alliances are stable, and I mean, we made the decision to kind of do the reset like early December, but also made this a decision at the same time so that we would delay doing it to give people some time off after Deepwater left the area, and just some time to rest up over the new year.
All right, that's good to hear, rather than like I've seen a lot of news of like coalitions falling apart and alliances falling apart, which essentially means people just leaving the game, right? Because as these groups kind of disband, people leave because of mostly for social reasons. We've talked a bit about fire, and you mentioned the news in the last 24 hours, so we know PanFam and some of Imperium are going to war with fire. Are you guys going to participate in that at all?
I mean, we really have no interest in it, but it is kind of funny to us. I mean, a few weeks ago, one of their FCs sent out a ping that was basically like, congratulations, we've seen off like 2 neighbours and punished them for their past transgressions and all this sort of stuff. And they were referring to RMC, so Red Menace Coalition, and then Cockroach Coalition, and RC. And the funny part is they basically had nothing to do with either, because fire was just feeding gloriously to Imperium and RMC, and then Horde showed up and saved them, which is the deployment that Gobbins was talking about when you read the kind of rhetoric of the last few days. And without that, they would have just fell on their face there and then. So the whole kind of, we really showed them, it's like, great, well, no, what actually happened is Horde came and babysat you until they were no longer a threat and couldn't contest. And then you just dealt with what was left, great. And then obviously the other thing is that they're happy that they've seen off Sigma, but Sigma leaving had very little to do with fire, and it was largely because of the state that RC was in, and similarly to the kind of heavy hitter alliances that remained in RC, they didn't want to continue the way that we were, and had long-term plans to join the Imperium anyway. And importantly, every time like fire came to try and contest us in USTZ, normally in catch, what they'd basically do is they'd get there, realise they couldn't take the fight, bounce saves for about 25 minutes until Horde showed up, and then Horde and fire would both shoot us. So, like, it's a bit kind of Kool-Aid-ish that they felt that they'd seen off their 2 kind of close rivals, because they never really had anything to do with the position that they ended up in from either of those 2 scenarios, but they did a lot of crowing about it, which basically, them hitting us and them hitting RMC is exactly what Goblins has been looking at in terms of, going after smaller alliances. And they'll say, yeah, we're a group of small alliances, but pretty much if you go to your court menu, go to the alliances tab and then click rankings, a lot of them are fire, right? You get the whole list of all the alliances. Their list of alliances is ridiculous. I think they've got more people and more alliances in their coalition than I've got members in my corp, right? It's a pretty ridiculous situation on their end, and they just took so many refugees after the Vietnam War that now it's kind of like, well, you might be a collection of small alliances, but if you've got a large number of small alliances and you all act as one entity, then it's really inconsequential. So it's going to be interesting now for this war, because Fire's going to get in a taste of their own medicine. Obviously, RC was stuck literally goons based in catch and shooting fire in Mencia and Tenerife. We held catch in South and obviously neighbouring Provi, and then Horde and Fire and friends were all in Mencia fighting back. So we got kind of caught in the crossfire a few times and ended up getting shot up, and a lot of times we couldn't contest. And now Fire is going to get attacked from both directions as well. So what goes around comes around. And we will see. The interesting part for RC in this is that Fire's evac route will take them straight into RC hunting territory. So we're kind of like banging the pans in the background, waiting for them to come in our direction. And I don't know, maybe we'll stick our foot out and trip a few people.
That was going to be my next question of anticipating their evac, because I have heard that they don't intend to defend and that they're just going to evac. And so I was going to ask about catching them off guard and whatnot.
Well, it's something that we've already spoken to the people that are involved in this conflict anyway. We're actively tracking their entire super fleet regardless, because, even generally it's going to be stragglers that get caught, unless we can pull something off with a dread cache that is somebody other than us. But the Imperium and Horde are going to be watching it themselves anyway. But on our perspective, it's going to be kind of catching people where they least expect it, wait for them to make a mistake, as we always do. I mean, in fairness, like we already kill a large number of fire stuff because they generally go through our space to get to their own anyway. So if they buy something from like Amamaki or Masaba, they end up jumping through our sea space to get where they're going. And the number of like Severance jump freighters that jump to our bait free ports is ridiculous. I'm pretty sure they alone push the price of arcs and shards up. I don't think I've ever seen an alliance that consistently makes the same 15 billion mistake over and over and fails to learn from it.
I gotcha. That's actually hilarious. We do have a question in chat. I'm curious of your thoughts. Do you think that Pandemic Horde / Imperium idea of making Faithful Ballast in a few regions for Independence Alliances a good idea? Do you have any thoughts there?
I like the idea, but I think as a few other people are aware, like getting to and from Faith, unless you have a jump bridge network, is no short ask. It's like I think it's like 8 or 9 mids in a jump freighter from Jita, for example. You have to go through several other nullsec regions to get there. So maybe, but you know, those alliances are going to need some kind of agreement or highway to get into and out of that space. So probably Faith isn't ideal, an ideal location for that, but generally, yeah. I mean, realistically, what they're going for is kind of what Provi is now, in terms of those alliances being kind of small, independent, and not held together by a coalition, kind of doing their own thing, coexisting. But, you know, that neighbour's domain, the neighbour's derelict, neighbour's Highsec, it's got like 3 low-sec entries, 2 high-sec, so it's very well connected to kind of mainline space. But Faith, that doesn't really apply for. So I agree definitely that it's healthy for the game and what they're trying to accomplish, but the location of it makes me doubt the practicality of it.
Yeah, that's the sentiment I've been hearing from a lot of others too, that why would you want to start a new alliance and go somewhere that you're just going to make a lot of stress to try and build infrastructure in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like some systems in Catch as well, like when Sigma left Catch, they'd literally just been abandoned and random alliances have taken the solve and they've not been contested yet. So there's really no... I don't think anyone really wants to kind of mess with that space as such. So the whole kind of... The Dracarys space, or the DC ticker on Dotlan, is something that's remained there and has always been the same. The green pocket that's on your screen there used to be weapons of mass production. And they merged into Sigma, so kind of all of that space is now kind of Imperium aligned, but the pockets to the kind of the right on Dotland and the north pockets, the pipe into Provi, is all held by random alliances that really don't really seem to have any alignment, and it's just very kind of a neutral area right now. And there's a few kind of iHubs reinforced there. I think 1P is still held by NC Dot. And the ETAC Y system is pretty sure held by like maybe even Big Ab still, or some random.
Yeah, those look much better. I mean, at least for someone like me, where I'm like, hey, I want to go fight a random alliance that's not going to blob me. I would definitely go into like Catch or Provi to find folks to fight.
It's certainly more accessible. I mean, there is some discussion as well, because the old station Freeport that's in 9UY, it was a Freeport while it was in Provi, it now isn't. It's the Unity station, which is the one that Ushra Khan took from CVA years and years ago. That's still around, still anchored, it's still armed. Now that obviously it's not a kind of primary concern for us in terms of controlling the region, there is a consideration there that we Freeport it, but it really depends on what the local alliances want. If they think that with, great, we'll do it. If not, then we kind of still gave our word that we wouldn't go out of our way to screw over those resident alliances. So it really is kind of their decision, but the button pushing is left to myself and Ushra Khan, who own the station more for kind of RP purposes than anything. And when we took Provi, we didn't have a problem with that, so it flies under their flag. But there is that possibility there that it will be a Freeport kind of right in the middle of Provi that will encourage small gang content, that sort of thing. But like I said, that's not set in stone. It's very much something that's up for discussion with the locals and not a button that we push unless they agree that they want to go in that direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna slightly pause there, see if Artemis has any questions or if anyone in chat has any other questions. We're kind of coming up to the top of the hour. I think Artemis is good. I was trying to think of other news we had to cover. We touched a little bit on the war against fire. And then there's also, I mean, we have some AT ship kills. I don't know if we want to discuss those. Oh, Ursha Khan's actually on one of those. Nice.
You should really take your Christmas tree down, by the way.
I know, my cat likes it. She likes the bulbs and stuff, and I figured I'd leave it for her. But, yeah. She also likes to eat it, which is really bad.
The 2 AC ships we killed were fairly interesting, I think. So the Hydra kill is interesting because it's a guy that's very well known to have been flying around there for a very, very long time, and it's been very good at it, very difficult to kind of track down and hold. I think if I remember rightly, he's got a 10 MNAB on there. So yeah, ridiculously hard to pin down. These guys have been trying to bait him a few times, managed to catch him and burned him down. So very impressive kill there, and takes a lot of work to kind of go hunting there. And like I say, fairly impressive from them. Unfortunate to lose an AT ship as always, but it's always interesting to look at how they die. The Maraca kill struck me as being a bit odd because I don't think I've ever seen a Maraca fit that's like autocannons. I've always assumed that people would like arty fit them and make use of the range control there, or if you're going to go with autocannons, you probably want an AB on there so that you don't like get range controlled. But the autocannon fit was fairly interesting. I think the guy's been using it a fair bit. From what I understand, he was fighting like either an Inti and a frig or like 2 frigs on the gate, under gate guns. And then another guy came through the gate in another frig and tackled him. And then 2 omens appeared and he was basically dead. And the Maraca's one of those ships that it's a very, very strong ship. I mean, it has the kind of like no. So most cloaking devices, even a Colops one, will have like 4 seconds recalibration delay before you can start locking anything. This thing functions like a stealth bomber. So decloak, you can immediately lock and you can immediately start shooting stuff. So it's very, very useful. And I used to sit in kind of faction warfare plexes a lot and just like volley people coming in. But the downside is it is very much a nano kitey ship, so you can't really mount it so that it has a decent amount of staying power. This one's kind of like a hybrid fit between a buffer tank with an ASB, which you see there's a video of that around of him boosting and trying to rep, but it's still not enough. And I mean, realistically, at the point where you get pinned down in this specific kind of ship and the way that it's being fitted, you're not going to be staying there very long, especially when you're kind of kiting. Stuff is built on damage mitigation for you staying alive, and then you've taken sentry guns, which will apply to frigs. So, you know, that's 300 DPS that you're going to take and is going to perfectly apply no matter what. And then obviously the 2 cruisers as well, you just melt. You get other AT ships like the Laylaps, the Fiends, and various others that will tank fairly well if they do get tackled. The Hicks are just ridiculously overpowered, but the older ones don't really have that ability. But like I say, the really strange thing for me on this one was that A, the guy wasn't in a plex, and B, the fact that he's autocannon fit, because it's a very strange way of fitting a Maraca. Normally you go arty and then use your range webs as range control and then try and run away as fast as possible if something scary appears. But from what I understand, this guy was fighting on a gate and then the frigs had tackled and jumped into him, so he didn't really have any notice and was distracted by trying to screen one of the frigs that was already on grid. So an interesting kill there as well. Like I say, probably not the way I would fit a Maraca, but nonetheless.
Yeah, it's as much as I love seeing AT ships fly, it's always fun to see them die too. So we are at the top of the hour. Artemis does not have any questions for you. Chat wants to talk about. We didn't even talk about Seto warping his Titans to a gate. Is there a story there, or is that Seto just being dumb?
Well, I mean, I think that is the story, is the simplest way to put it. I mean, we've seen this before in a lot of contexts where you get, like, certainly Sedo, well, things will go really well for a while and they won't think there's any threat. And then suddenly, like, you get into the hubris mode and you do something really dumb, like jumping your Titans to an Athanor or jumping them to a fort and then warping them to 100 clicks off a gate with neutrals in local that you know are like RC hunters and dictors. It was kind of odd because I think they put their Titans next door for some reason and they were cloaked in system and they signed back into their staging fort and a few of them bumped off. I wasn't there for this one. It was like probably like 5:30 in the morning, my time. And I think from what the guy said, there was a Ragnarok that bumped off each other. And the two avatars were apparently, as far as I'm aware, still in tether range. But the Ragnarok walked off to the gate at 100 clicks to ping off and come back. So my guys were scrambling to tackle the guy and then missed him. And then the two avatars, for some reason, landed on the gate as well. So the two avatars got bubbled. They both died. And unlike their previous stagings, this one was in nullsec, which meant that they got basically all of their facts were like in system, and even the ones that weren't, we had an inhib up and the Titans were moving, so they couldn't track the inhib. And then they had the choice of like basically panic and try and jump sino them in at stupid range, or try and warp the facts off the fort to kill to rep the Titans, but they were getting defensive bubbled. So pretty much all of those caps that you see on their side of the battle report, only two of them were actually the ones that were tackled at the start. Everything else kind of walked in as those two Titans were dying or after they were dead. So it was quite kind of amusing to see that happen, and that was the last thing that they achieved in their campaign, like feeding 300 billion Titans, which is very much trademark RC in terms of like, oh, we might have lost a load of fights, but -2 Titans for you, smiley face. I mean, you can look at all the battle reports, and obviously RC comes out over the course of the 3 months a hell of a lot worse in terms of like is killed versus lost, but we still win 2-0 on supers.
Yeah, that's actually kind of hilarious end to all of this. It's also, I feel like it's fitting just for you guys hunting things too, even though I guess this was just playing off of people being dumb rather than hunting.
Yeah, I mean, we'd been waiting for an opportunity for a long time, but really we knew that, like in low set, because you could just warp facts around, wasn't really too viable to actually pull something off. But like when they were in null set, there was other stuff that we could have done. Like we had a load of Hicks logged off on their fort, so we could have tackled their supers literally anywhere we wanted, and then just logged in all of the Hicks and just put bubbles up all over the fort, and then they'd have to sit there and kill 15 Hicks before they could jump a single fax off their fort. You can't do that in low set because they just undock, they're tethered, and then they jump, right? But if you got like 15 Hicks, like with 100 MNABs burning around your undock, then you're going to have to find a way to kill them before you can jump any facts to your tackled supers. But, you know, we were actually probing them in the system that were cloaked. We had observatories out, but they jumped back and then we got the kills in their staging anyway. So I'm not really too picky on where we kill them, but quite happy that we managed to get those frags.
Yeah, it's all good. So we are kind of at the end of the show. I don't know if you have any final thoughts. We appreciate you coming out here and talking about the history of RC and kind of what the future looks like.
No, I'm just fairly optimistic now that I don't have to babysit 1,500 dudes, to be honest. I'm kind of done. I have my own kids to worry about now, so...
No more herding cats.
She's probably more competent than most I've had to deal with, so kind of fills me with pride from one respect, means my genetics are fairly good, but also means that I've been putting myself through hell for the last 2 years, so that's now over. So very much looking forward to what 2023 brings.
No, that's good to hear. Do you have any shout outs for the friends back home or viewers or anything like that?
A shout out basically to everyone in RC that's kind of flown alongside us, and the non-fair weather friends, the guys that were still here and alive and fighting and forming as Deepwater departed. Not so much to those guys that ran away during the conflict or left and went to places with better weather. But certainly for the few guys as well, obviously they've put up with a situation they didn't want to be in for a very long time. So now it's time to give them some TLC.
Nice. Well, thank you. We super appreciate you coming out and joining us. Thank you to Twitch chat. With that, I'll let Artemis run the credits and we will see you all later.